The stagecoach rattled to a halt, its wheels groaning against the hard-packed earth, kicking up a cloud of dust that stung Clara Weston's eyes and coated her throat. She gripped her valise, the leather handle worn and smooth from months of travel, and stepped down onto the cracked, sun-baked ground of the Wyoming frontier. Her boots sank slightly into the dirt, and she squinted against the harsh afternoon sun, her bonnet doing little to shield her from its glare. The driver, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard and a squint that seemed permanent, pointed an oiled finger toward a weathered ranch house in the distance. "That's the Bar X," he grunted, his voice as rough as the landscape. He heaved her trunk onto the ground with a thud, climbed back onto the driver's seat, and snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward, and the stagecoach vanished in a haze of dust, leaving Clara alone in the vast, empty expanse. She adjusted her grip on the valise, her heart pounding like a trapped bird in her chest. This was the moment she'd been imagining for months. She was here to marry Eli Tanner, a rancher whose letters had arrived faithfully every few weeks, each one penned in a careful, deliberate hand. His words had been plain but kind, filled with quiet promises of a steady life, a home, and a future together on his sprawling cattle ranch. Clara had read those letters until the edges of the paper frayed, memorizing the way he described the rolling hills, the way the wind carried the scent of sagebrush, the way he hoped she'd find peace in this wild place. She'd left behind a cramped boarding house and street, Louis, a life of mending other people's clothes and dodging the leers of men who saw a spinster as easy prey. At 26, Clara had seized Eli's proposal like a lifeline, trading the city's clamor for the unknown of the frontier. But as she trudged toward the ranch house, her trunk dragging behind her on a makeshift sled of burlap and rope, a prickle of unease settled in her stomach. The Bar X didn't look like the thriving spread Eli had described. The fence sagged like an old man's spine, its posts leaning at drunken angles. The barn's red paint had peeled away, leaving gray, splintered wood exposed to the elements. Weeds choked the path to the house, and the porch sagged under the weight of neglect. No one came to greet her, no hired hands, no barking dogs, no Eli rushing out with a smile to welcome his bride. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the dry grass. Clara paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and scanned the horizon. Maybe Eli was out in the fields, tending to his herd. Maybe he hadn't known the stagecoach's schedule. She squared her shoulders, smoothed her travel-worn dress, a pale blue muslin that had once been her best, and took a deep breath. She'd come this far. She wouldn't falter now. As she reached the edge of the yard, a small figure emerged from behind a scraggly sagebrush bush. It was a girl, no older than 8, with pigtails tied with fraying ribbons and a dress so patched it looked like a quilt. Her bare feet were dusted with dirt, and her grey eyes so wide and unsettlingly perceptively locked onto Clara with an intensity that made her pause. The girl tilted her head, studying Clara as if she were a puzzle to be solved. "You're her, ain't you?" she said, her voice soft but certain, carrying a weight that didn't match her small frame. Clara blinked, caught off guard. "I'm Clara Weston," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm here for Mr. Tanner." "Is he broken, Bar? Is he home?" The girl's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile, as if she held a secret Clara wasn't privy to. "God finally sent you to us," she whispered, her words so quiet they seemed to blend with the wind. Before Clara could respond, the girl turned and darted toward the house, her pigtails bouncing, leaving Clara rooted to the spot, her valise suddenly heavy in her hands. The words echoed in her mind. "God finally sent you to us." They were strange, almost eerie, coming from a child. Clara shook her head, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up her spine. She was tired, that was all. The journey had been long, days of jolting stagecoaches, sleepless nights in dusty way stations, and meals of stale biscuits and weak coffee. She was imagining things, reading too much into child's fanciful talk. Hoisting her trunk again, she followed the path the girl had taken, her boots crunching against the gravelly earth. The house loomed closer now, its weathered clapboard siding peeling like old skin. The windows were cloudy with grime, and a shutter hung askew, creaking in the breeze. Clara climbed the porch steps, wincing as they groaned under her weight, and knocked on the door. The sound was swallowed by the vastness around her, unanswered. She knocked again, Harder, her knuckles stinging. Still nothing. Hesitating, she pushed the door open, its hinges squealing in protest. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, leather, and something sour, like milk left out too long. The front room was dim, lit only by slivers of sunlight filtering through the dirty windows. A table stood in the center, cluttered with tin cups, a half-empty whiskey bottle, and a scattering of papers. A man sat there, slumped in a chair, his face shadowed by the brim of a battered hat. He didn't look up as Clara entered, but his fingers tightened around the cup he held, the knuckles white against the chipped enamel. Clara cleared her throat, her voice tentative. "Excuse me, sir, I'm looking for Eli Tanner." The man's head snapped up, and Clara's breath caught. He wasn't Eli. Not even close. The tintype Eli had sent showed a broad-shouldered man with a clean-shaven face and kind eyes. This man was wiry, his frame lean and taut, like a coiled spring. A jagged scar ran across his jaw, disappearing into the stubble that darkened his cheeks. His eyes, a piercing blue, studied her with a mix of suspicion and exhaustion. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice like gravel underfoot. Clara's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I'm Clara Weston, the broken bar Eli Tanner's bride. The agency sent me." The man's laugh was sharp, cutting through the stale air like a blade. "Eli's spread is 50 miles east. Lady, this ain't the Bar X, this is the Double J. I'm Jace Reed." He leaned back, crossing his arms, his gaze never leaving her face. "You're a long way from where you're supposed to be." Clara's stomach plummeted, the weight of his words sinking in. The agency had made a mistake, yeah, a colossal, humiliating mistake. She'd been sent to the wrong ranch, dropped in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who looked like he'd sooner toss her out than offer her a glass of water. Her cheeks burned, and she clutched her valise tighter, as if it could anchor her against the rising panic. "There must be some misunderstanding," she stammered. The driver's a fool," Jace cut in, his tone flat. "Happens sometimes. Stagecoaches mix up the routes." "Ain't my problem." Clara opened her mouth to argue, to demand something, an explanation, a solution, but a small hand tugged at her sleeve. She looked down to find the girl from outside, her gray eyes wide and pleading. "Don't go," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "Pa needs you. We need you." Clara's breath hitched. The girl Alila, she'd later learn, clung to her with a desperation that made Clara's heart ache. She glanced at Jace, who was staring at the table now, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against the wood. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the weight of unspoken stories pressed against the walls. Clara's mind raced. She should leave, find a way to Eli's ranch, to the life she'd been promised. But Leela's words, that quiet conviction a God finally sent you to USA, stirred something deep inside her, something she couldn't name. "I'll stay the night," Clara said finally, her voice firmer than she felt. "Just to sort this out." Jace's eyes flicked up, narrowing. "Suit yourself. Ain't much here, though." He gestured vaguely at the room, his tone dismissive, but there was a flicker of something in his expression, a curiosity, maybe, or wariness. Leela's face lit up, her small hand squeezing Clara. "I knew you'd stay," she said, her voice bright with a child's certainty. She tugged Clara toward the kitchen, chattering about a broken stove and a cat that hid in the barn. Clara followed, her mind a tangle of questions. The house was a wreck, of dishes piled in the sink, a layer of dust coating every surface, a chair with the missing leg propped against the wall. Leela's dress was threadbare, her shoes too small, pinching her toes. Jace, for all his gruffness, moved with the weariness of a man carrying too much for too long. Clara set her valise down and rolled up her sleeves. She wasn't staying, she told herself. This was temporary, a practical decision until she could get to Eli. But as she lit the stove and rummaged through the sparse pantry, pulling together flour and a few shriveled potatoes for a simple stew, she felt Leela's eyes on her, bright and hopeful. Jace sat silently at the table, watching her work, his scarred face unreadable. The smell of cooking filled the air, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the house felt a little less like a mistake. Leela hovered close, her chatter filling the silence. She talked about her mother, who died 2 winters ago, about the prayers she whispered at night for someone to come and make things right. Pa's been sad, Leela said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But you're here now. Clara's throat tightened. She wasn't here for them. She was here for real life, for the life she'd planned. But as she stirred the stew, the girl's words burrowed into her, planting seeds of doubt. When the meal was ready, Clara set the table with mismatched plates, her hands moving on instinct. Jace ate without a word, but his eyes followed her, sharp and assessing. Leela devoured her portion, her small face glowing with something like wonder. "Ain't had food like this in forever," she said, her mouth full. Clara smiled despite herself, the knot in her chest loosening just a fraction. As night fell, Leela led her to a small bedroom at the back of the house, its walls bare except for a faded quilt draped over a narrow bed. "This was Ma's," Leela said, her voice soft. "You can sleep here." She hesitated, then added, "You're gonna fix us, I know it." Before Clara could respond, Leela darted out, leaving her alone with the weight of those words. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her valise at her feet. She pulled out Eli's letters, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. He was waiting for her, 50 miles away, with the ranch and the life that were supposed to be hers. But as she lay back, the creak of the house and the distant howl of the wind wrapping around her, she couldn't shake Leela's voice, or the way Jace's eyes had softened, just for a moment, when she'd set the table. The wrong ranch didn't feel entirely wrong, and that scared her more than anything.